Hello, my name is Justin McClure. I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about Lina Wertmüller, the director of Swept Away, Love and Anarchy, The Seduction of Mimi.
The female art house filmmaker of the 70s.
The first woman to ever be nominated for a Best Director Oscar.
A foreign filmmaker who was impersonated not once but twice on Saturday Night Live.
Really?
By Lorraine Newman. Yes.
Wow.
That's how well known she was in the 70s.
And now, pretty much nothing.
No.
Kino recently put out like a Blu-ray box set, but as far as like critical writings about her work, not that much of it.
And I was very curious about that going in because you and I had never seen any of her movies before this week. And there's so much hunger, there's so much appetite these days for female filmmakers and for kind of reclaiming the history of unacknowledged women directors. Why not her?
Especially that Swept Away was not only super popular, but it prompted a Madonna Guy Ritchie remake in the 2000s. Mm-hmm. And usually when you say Swept Away, most people go, oh yeah, that Madonna movie? And you're like, no, this is the original one that made such an uproar when it came out. I had never seen any of her movies. You had never seen any of her movies. And was there a reason for that?
I don't know. I mean, she's somebody who went into eclipse, I think. Mm-hmm. The films she was making in the 80s and 90s were, by most accounts, not very good. And she just doesn't seem to have a lot of champions anymore. She's somebody whose name is sort of mentioned kind of...
in passing,
in passing, respectfully, but
and
not
she's
much more.
Still alive. She's in her 90s. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, there hasn't been that reclamation when someone has passed away. Mm-hmm. Even though that there was like a documentary about her that came out a few years ago.
And last year, the Quad Cinema, when it reopened in New York, I think started with a Lina Wertmüller retrospective. So there's a bit of movement in that direction. So I saw 3 of her best-known movies this week. I had a bit of a bumpy experience with them. I more or less like them, but I also have a better sense of why she's not in fashion anymore.
Absolutely. I was hoping that, I would put these movies on, and I'd go yes! This is why she was so popular. Mm-hmm. And instead I saw them and went, yes! This is why I don't hear about these movies that much anymore.
But some of them are good, and yes, all of them have good things about them. So let's get into it a bit, but what do you know about her background?
Well, I know that she came up in the industry as an assistant director for Fellini on 8½. That's mentioned in every biography. Mm-hmm. She started with her first film by making a social conscious kind of neo-realist thing in 1963 called The Lizards. Mm-hmm. And then she decided, I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to make entertaining films. And she made a bunch of musicals that I could not find anywhere. Mm-hmm. There's no English subtitles. I saw on YouTube clips and stuff like that, but nothing until the movie that was really her international breakout, which was Seduction of Mimi in 1972.
The first one that we watched was Love and Anarchy from 1973, and I think an important thing for understanding her appeal in the 70s was that her movies were very much loaded with sex and politics and the intermingling of the two, which were topics that were very much on people's minds in the 70s, and particularly in the cinema. This was the time of Last Tango in Paris, even Deep Throat, boundary-pushing movies. There are other examples aside from that.
And Love and Anarchy is about her 2 favorite actors, Mariangela Melato and Giancarlo Giannini.
Giannini is her Marcello Mastroianni, basically.
Yeah, he stars in, I think, all of her 70s movies. Mm-hmm. And he's this wide-eyed, puppy dog-eyed guy who is great at playing sad, pathetic losers.
But he can play so many different kinds of sad, pathetic losers. In one movie, he'll be a rough and tumble brute. In another one, he'll be kind of a smug dandy. Or in this one, he'll be just a quiet,
freckled, crazy-haired, revolutionary.
So the plot of this movie, Giannini plays a peasant from the country who comes to Rome with this plot to kill Mussolini. He's a dedicated anarchist, and before he wants to kill Mussolini, he stays for 3 days being sheltered in a brothel. And this brothel is in this kind of beautiful piece of ancient Italian architecture, marble columns and statues and everything.
And you get a lot of Fellini-like tracking shots of women's bodies and all kinds of women's bodies.
She owes a lot to Fellini stylistically, which is one reason I think why I resist her a little bit.
Not a Fellini fan?
I mean, I respect Fellini. I like lots of Fellini, but, there are certain directors who on some base level rub you the wrong way a little bit. And there's something about I'm gonna sound like the guy in line at Annie Hall, but there's but there's something about his like aggressiveness and his boisterousness, and like the fact that everybody's always yelling through all his movies and her movies, that just kind of grates on me a little bit.
But while there's a kind of exuberance to Fellini's films, I would say that Wertmüller, she almost makes it more uncomfortable, like what you're watching.
Yeah.
Like there's a level of, I guess, fun and excitement that's taken away with it. Almost a questioning of like, oh, you enjoyed this in Fellini's film. Well, look how it would like actually be.
Well, she doesn't identify as a feminist.
No, she does not.
And I would not call her films feminist, and yet they are the work of a female filmmaker.
I mean, they're all centered around the idea of like identity of male and female characters.
She often has these very hyper-masculine heroes who she films very objectively, who come across as very ridiculous. And, you know, this brothel setting recurs in her movies, and it's always also filmed very objectively. You know, my girlfriend was pointing this out to me as we were watching the movie, that if it were directed by a man, the setting would probably seem either more tragic or be filmed more leeringly, or maybe both. And there are many scenes in this movie where Giannini sort of sits around and he's almost like a non-entity in this presence while all the prostitutes go about their business. He is not the central figure in their lives, which it would be disconcerting, I think, for the sort of person who would hire a prostitute.
I think the thing that I like the most in Love and Anarchy is that it's telling the story that you expect to go a certain way and then just kind of breaks it apart as it goes along. And watching her movies throughout this week, that's what she does in every single one of her movies.
Yeah, so in this movie, spoiler alert, folks, Giannini, as he spends these 3 days at the brothel, falls in love with one of the sex workers, and eventually the sex workers sort of foil his plot to kill Mussolini.
Yeah, so what happens is that these two women that are in his life, the one that he's fallen in love with, and the other one played by Mariangela Malato, who kind of loves him, they make a decision that they will not wake him so he cannot go kill Mussolini. And when Giannini learns of this, when he wakes up the next morning, he freaks out like a big giant baby. Like, this act of trying to kill Mussolini would have defined his life and proved that he was a man. And because he can't do that, he just goes crazy.
He ends up killing himself in prison after being beaten by the police. And the movie is ambivalent on whether or not it was all worth it. I mean, it seems to suggest that his symbolic gesture,
which is just going into a crowd and shooting a bunch of fascists.
Yeah, even if it was a failure, has some significance, but what significance that is hard to determine.
No, yeah, like, I felt the film ended in a way which was almost like, it's really this man and these beliefs that define manhood for him. Like, he's undone by that and destroyed by it completely. Like, the things that he's leading up to, his professed love for this prostitute, it just doesn't mean anything when this belief of like, oh, this thing I was leading up to, this thing that was giving me this mythic and legendary backstory, now that I don't have it, who am I? I'm nothing. And that his freak out is like every nice guy who's presented with this kind of scenario.
I will say I thought this movie was 30 minutes too long.
Oh, yeah.
There were many redundant scenes, many scenes where I was quite bored.
But Love and Anarchy is often considered her best film, but Swept Away is the one that I think is associated the most with her name.
So if there's something I like best about her, I think it's the fact that, you know, even though she is a socialist, she's not dogmatic in her art. Like, it's hard to kind of pin these movies down on saying any one thing.
Yeah, like, watching these movies, multiple people could take away multiple different things. Like what I said about Love and Anarchy, I'm sure maybe if she, Wertmüller, heard it, she'd go like, what are you talking about? That's not what the movie is about at all. And I think that's a strength to her films. At the same time, something like Swept Away, watching it now, you're like, whoa.
It's problematic for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I somewhat appreciated this movie. So the full title, Swept Away by an Unusual Destiny in the Blue Sea of August, from 1974. It's about a rich bourgeois woman played by Mariangelo Malata and a boorish communist man played by Giancarlo Giannini.
And when we say boorish, like, he's a huge asshole. Like, he's a misogynist. He's tons of bad stuff.
And just his whole affect is rough and tumble. She's on a boat with some of her rich friends. He's, you know, manning the boat. long story short,
they get swept away.
They get stranded on a desert island, and though she has all the power in the regular world, he suddenly has all the power in this island world because, society, this world that we've constructed with all its morals and everything falls apart, and politics all fall apart, and what reasserts itself is a certain gender essentialism.
And we should warn people that we're going to talk about a subject matter that appears in a lot of Wertmüller's films, which is sexual assault. It's treated sometimes as a joke in some movies.
I feel like she has a certain, like, Camille Paglia-ish sexual politics. Like, she's very interested in just this kind of very primal male-female...
especially the idea of, like, a man dominating a woman.
And the woman kind of liking it.
Yeah, and falling in love with that idea. I mean, we're two guys talking about this, so...
Yeah, I mean, I don't entirely feel qualified to talk about this, although, I mean... I think you will agree it's different coming from a female filmmaker
than if it was coming from a man.
Yeah.
Like, I watched a spaghetti western that she made, The Bella Star Story, and considering that it was technically a commercial job, it still tackles all the same themes, which is this amazing woman cowboy is introduced being dominated by a man, and she seemingly enjoys that domination. Like, she can do anything. She's the best sharpshooter. She's smart. She can pull off a heist, but she likes to put herself in situations where this domination happens, but she's never shown as being above it. She's always shown as being, like, trapped in the situation.
I mean, the fact that this is clearly something that is, something that Wertmüller is working through, I think art is as good an arena as any to work through this.
And even in Swept Away, like, the man played by Giannini, he's a huge asshole. Like, he's never portrayed as, like, I'm on the lower rung and, like, you're treating me like garbage, and now that we're equal, I'll show you that I'm the best.
Yeah. The fact that he's a socialist doesn't make him a good person.
No,
right?
It does not. Yeah. And the fact that, like, they form a romantic relationship is icky, but Wertmüller's obviously trying to, like, talk through something here.
Yeah, and she's also, like, she is a socialist, but she's also, like, an anarchist. Like, she is opposed to these arbitrary structures that society imposes.
Yes.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, like, that's what the movie's about, even though that it's a very unpleasant experience watching it.
It certainly is. I mean, a lot of people have talked about how funny this movie is.
I did not find it funny.
I didn't find it funny at all. I found it a bit of a slog being trapped with these two characters.
It's very cynical, and like there's any fun that they find in each other comes from like that sexual assault and that idea of domination. So it was difficult for me to feel empathy for this. But, like, I don't know, maybe when it plays in a theater, like, laughs are plenty or something like that.
Boy, I have trouble imagining there being a lot of laughs when it plays now.
I read a review that someone, like, saw it at, I think at the Quad Cinema, and, like, the audience was, like, eating it up like it was a Marx Brothers comedy.
That's interesting. Well, maybe, like, this is discomforting subject matter,
So, like, the way that you react through laughter. So, right after Swept Away, she made Seven Beauties. And this is the one that she was nominated for Best Director at the Oscars.
This is also the one of the three that I liked the most.
Yes. Well, it's technically, I want to say the most fun, also the one that deals with the Holocaust and has horrifying imagery in it.
Yeah, it's a very peculiar mix of tones, and again, it doesn't come to any one particular point.
No.
But it raises a lot of interesting ideas.
Essentially, her go-to guy, Giannini, plays a kind of slick-down gangster in charge of this house of women.
But to even call him a gangster is a little bit flattering. He's a small-time hood. And
he views himself as a big-time gangster.
And a self-styled ladies' man, and he's got 7 sisters, and that's why he has the nickname Seven Beauties.
And when he discovers that one of his sisters is also working as a prostitute, he freaks out, and he demands that she tell him who made her do this, which is her fiancé, and he does this by strangling his sister, showing that, yes, he is also a garbage man, and that he is awful, even though that he cares about these women.
And he also gets some advice from the local Don, which is do something that makes people fear you. And what he does is kill the pimp.
Accidentally,
but then after he's killed him, he cuts him up into 3 suitcases worth of body parts, mails those suitcases all over the country, and, well, wouldn't you know it, he gets caught almost immediately. And there's a very funny scene where he's, like, trying to elude police capture. He's like, you'll never take me alive, and they run up right from behind him and take him.
And so this movie, out of all the ones that I watched, was probably the funniest.
Yeah.
Like, Love and Anarchy had jokes. Swept Away, not so much.
Had jokes.
Yeah, it
probably.
did.
Yeah.
I didn't laugh at them. But Seven Beauties is the one that's like, I can understand why she would have been nominated for Best Director. It's very, like, light on its feet. It's time-shifting narrative all the place, and Oscar voters love that kind of shit.
They also like the Holocaust.
Yes.
As a subject, I should say.
Not the Holocaust itself.
Yes.
And here it's treated really, like, seriously.
Really seriously, but I do wonder if there were debates at the time about, like, aestheticizing the Holocaust in relation to this, because the Holocaust looks so kind of beautiful in this movie.
And she also puts almost ironic classical music over it.
Yeah.
As if, like, to underline, like, oh, these images of the Holocaust you've seen before, now look at them in this different context.
And, all the prisoners are kind of put into formation in these, like, beautiful, lines, and it's shot in this kind of stark, like, almost black and white style. I mean,
expressionist almost.
Yeah, like perhaps a defense of it could be that she almost visually depicts the Holocaust as this big, serious, stunning operation, and in the middle of it is this little worm of a guy.
Yeah, but the human beings inside, like all the men that you see in this machine, they look miserable, and death can come at any moment, and it's not treated as like a joke.
And the main character, Giannini, he considers himself this, like, man of honor, this swashbuckling rogue type, and the movie is just a chronicle of the various ways that he lies and cheats and is a coward and debases himself.
Yeah, that the thing that he strangled his sister for even trying to do, that he would do it in an instant to save his own life.
Yeah, the fact that this is our hero, in the story of the Holocaust.
Hey, man,
it's like, I mean, I don't mind that he's the hero. Like, it's like, it almost makes sense that he's the hero of this movie, just because, like, this is a senseless tragedy.
Because he even goes, like, why aren't they rising up? Why aren't they doing something? Like, why aren't they fighting back? And then he's the one who's like, oh, I don't want to do anything. I'm scared.
Yeah, he's the worst person.
I will sell out the people that are close to me to be able to survive the situation.
Yeah.
Again, I'm all for movies that are like, men who think they're cool are really shit. Yeah, that's my jam. Especially when it's fun, like in this movie.
Yeah. And man, I love Giannini's performance. I mean, he's just so resolutely unlikable.
Well, he gets to play so many different modes in this one, where he's like, at the beginning, he thinks he's the coolest guy ever. Then he gets to play a weasel, and then he gets to play, like, just a worm, like the worst possible person who's realizing what he's doing is bad and is trying to do stuff to make it not happen, but he'll still go through it anyway, because how else can he survive?
He also has some great scenes with Shirley Stoller, who you may remember as the leading lady from The Honeymoon Killers, and who I did not recognize, actually.
I did not recognize her as well, and we looked it up and we were like, wait, we thought she was a one and done in The Honeymoon Killers. Nope, she's appeared in tons of film, including, like, Spike Lee's Malcolm X, and, like, tons of studio
The Deer Hunter she's in as well. Yeah, she's the SS Commandant, who he sort of, like, sexually humiliates himself with.
That's right. And it all builds to a finale where he realizes he is also a piece of shit. So, man, again, I'm all for that kind of stuff.
Lina Wertmüller's star shone brightly but briefly. In the 80s, very few, I think none of her films were successful.
So after Seven Beauties, she actually got a 4-picture deal with Warner Brothers, and she made the first film, A Night Full of Rain. It tanked. And then they're like, no more 4-picture deal. Like, go out on your own way. But she was able to continue making movies. At one point, doing the perfect thing to do in the 80s when you're kind of an art house director on the rocks, which is make a film for Canon.
Yes.
She did one with Harvey Keitel, which I did not get a chance to watch this week. It's not held in very high regard.
I'm very interested in that. Yeah.
And she just kept working. She did 16 plus, like, feature film projects after, like, that run in the 70s.
She made Ciao Professora, which is one of those Cinema Paradiso exploitation films that, companies like Miramax released in the 90s.
Which, as you pointed out, would haunt the, like, foreign section of Rogers videos.
Yes.
Where you'd be like, that movie. When you're going through, like, the bin to get 2 for $15, and you're like, so many copies of Ciao Professor.
But she's, more or less retired as a filmmaker now, although she sometimes directs operas. She's
90 plus, yeah.
I didn't know she was still alive,
Yeah,
actually.
she is.
But yeah, she just had that documentary come out about her, so attempts are being made to reclaim her. I'm not sure how reclaimable she is.
And why do you think these films are so popular in the 70s And, like, for some reason, like, she was never able to kind of reclaim that magic internationally, at least.
I think a lot of it just has to do with kind of what was in the waters in the 70s. Like, this volatile mix of, like, sex and sexual politics, male-female relationships, and, like,
she was taking
left politics.
She was taking it from a perspective as well that, like, nobody had done in this particular way before, and that there was something obviously very novel to see these stories told.
And she was also quite a personality as well. Like, she was on the cover of New York Magazine in an article that the great John Simon wrote.
Oh, no.
Terrible. Who called her the most important filmmaker since Ingmar Bergman, actually.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, there's still value in watching something like Seven Beauties, I feel.
Yeah.
Like, if I would recommend one that people should go check out, it's that one.
Yeah, and I think the other ones are interesting to wrestle with as well.
Yeah.
So, Justin, do we have any letters this week?
We do. As per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And this week on our Patreon, which is $5 a month, patreon.com/The Important Cinema Club, we talked about Nothing But Trouble. And if you're like, wait, what's Nothing But Trouble? Of course, it's Dan Aykroyd's only feature film directorial credit.
And we go into a little more on Le Cinéma d'Aykroyd.
And we take a little pit stop on the Cinema de Chevy Chase as well. If you have not seen this movie, it's often considered one of the worst of all time.
And please watch it.
Yes. Or listen to our episode. Please give us $5 a month to get 4 exclusive episodes of the Important Cinema Club. And we're going to get into some real interesting stuff as well, because we're getting into Shocktober.
Oh, man.
And you also get the whole back catalog, which is about 80 episodes at this point. So our first letter is from Matthew Kumar. And he goes, Hey,
okay,
pals.
I'm just going to leave.
I'm writing this letter from La La Land, or should I say Holly Weird. Wait, did you write this letter, Will?
Finally, he said something I agree with.
Nah, I'll stop writing this letter the way I assume Will Sloan would if he lived in LA. I didn't even know that was coming up next. This will be a quick one. After listening to your Lizzie Borden episode, I appreciated your choice to try and talk more about female filmmakers, in particular the challenge they faced. I think I've hit on your next subject, who manages to merge that worthy topic with your love of, well, the kind of trash you usually hide on your Patreon episodes. Penelope Spheris, the director of the Decline of Western Civilization documentaries. Or, most notably, she found herself directing Wayne's World, on which she apparently repeatedly clashed with Mike Myers. And since that point was unable to work doing anything except directing broad comedies like The Beverly Hillbillies or The Little Rascals. In fact, directing 2 David Spade films, though I remember liking Senseless, honestly. And her post-2000 work is even more of a bummer.
Can I just say something about the David Spade movie In and Out, which I don't, or not In and Out, Lost and Found.
Okay.
I mixed up my 90s studio comedies. There's a poster for that movie where David Spade is naked and he is holding a dog in front of his junk.
Yes.
And the tagline is, "One of these dogs is Spade." Okay.
That's a good joke. Anyway, I'm sure you'll be able to dig into all the deeper than I've bothered to, opening a Wikipedia page. Lots of love, Matthew. So, Penelope Spheris is actually, like, on my list as the next woman director that I want to do.
I am interested in her. I like Decline of Western Civilization Part 2 very much.
And you're obviously excited to get back in that Jim Varney mode and watch the Beverly Hillbillies.
I felt that Jim Varney brought a quiet dignity to his performance as Jed Clampett.
Were you a fan of Wayne's World when you were a kid?
You know, I only saw it once or twice, but I did like it.
Yeah, I remember the other kids were, like, obsessed with it. And it was a movie I never saw, I feel, at the right age.
Yeah, I think I might have seen it just a bit too late.
Thank you, Matthew. We will definitely be talking about Penelope Spheris in the near future. And the next letter is from Dan Bach, and it goes, Cinephile? I added a question mark there. I don't know how to word this question exactly. It's more of a rambling personal story. Just joking. But what I'm really trying to get at is, do you think it's better for a director to be a cinephile like Martin Scorsese, or for them to not have such an immense knowledge of film history like Werner Herzog? Great podcast, Daniel Bowling.
My feeling is that there is no right answer. I will say that sometimes we complain a bit about directors who seem to have done most of their living through films. This is a complaint that's often lodged at Quentin Tarantino, for instance.
And then you don't have to watch the Quentin Tarantino movies.
Yeah, you don't have to. I mean, I do kind of like that Werner Herzog is somebody who seems to have, like, lived a very robust life. But I don't know, I also think it helps to have, like, a pretty broad knowledge of art.
I mean, I get really excited when I know a director like loves movies, loves watching movies and exploring movies. But at the same time, I love movies made by directors who like just need to put it on screen. Like that's different, right? Than like a completely understanding the form versus someone who has stories to tell, like Werner Herzog, and he just wants to find different ways or interesting ways to tell it. At the same time, some directors who are like that and are not cinephiles, I'm not going to name a film that I watched recently, maybe we'll get into it a few episodes later, from a director that played a film festival recently, and then you watch it and you go, oh, this is a director that made this that hadn't seen these types of movies before. So what they're doing, they think it's much more interesting than it actually is.
Sure.
But, you know, it all depends on who's telling the story. So thank you very much for your letter, Daniel. And as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And next week, we're getting into Shocktober.
Oh! Suck your blood.
And we're starting classy with Todd Browning.
Todd Browning, best known today, I guess, as the director of the 1931 Bela Lugosi Dracula, but his crowning achievement is
One of Us.
The movie he made right after, Freaks.
And he made a lot more movies about circus folk, and a lot of films starring Lon Chaney Sr.
So, we'll, of course, be discussing Freaks, as well as some other films from his checkered career.
He's not a director that's often held up as like a visual stylist or anything like that, but he is definitely someone who had his obsessions that he revisited over and over and over again to the point of neurosis, pretty much.
Yeah, and did he drink himself to death?
I don't know, but he's one of those filmmakers who just kind of stepped away from the industry and actually died in the 60s.
Yeah.
So, really looking forward to that, and until then, my name's Justin Klum.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. So it's October, Will. Have you made your horror films to watch list yet?
I haven't, but I do plan to watch horror films.
Do you?
Yeah.
And so you use it as like a jumping pad to be like, this is a good time to watch horror films.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to watch horror films.
Me too. I love it. I always make a big list out right before October, and I like to like check them off, and I only watch 1/10 of the list that I make, and they just show up year after year. But it actually like made me think that like on the internet, people love to, like, you always see this on Letterboxd, it's like Hooptober or whatever.
Oh, or Noirvember.
Yeah, this like way to force yourself to watch movies by doing in this like regimented list. I can't do it. Can you? Have you ever tried to do anything like that?
No, I haven't. Although I do like the idea of watching horror movies in October because the temperature feels like Halloween night all through October.
The entire time, yes.
And there's just that feeling in the air, and it's good hot chocolate or tea weather. Good, snuggling up in a blanket with your sweetie weather.
Or your friends. It made me think of like, how do people pick movies now, right? Because you used to hear, like this is playing on HBO, it's Beastmaster, hey, Beastmaster's on. And like that's how films would become famous. Like you hear the story of It's a Wonderful Life, went into the public domain, played all the time, that's why everybody knows it.
Yeah.
And like, how will that continue from this point onward?
I wonder if Netflix might be the opportunity. Like there are a lot of movies that like are not that well known in their theatrical run, but like lots of people have seen something like, I don't know, Green Room, for instance, because they just saw it on Netflix.
But I don't know if like that, like, it's a Netflix movie thing exists in the way that it would be like, I say Rush Hour 2, you think TBS.
Yeah.
Because it played all the time.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't exist anymore, I don't feel like.
Although, maybe it will at some point.
Maybe,
like,
yeah.
In the future, we'll look back on it and we'll think of what are the Netflix movies.
The Cloverfield paradox.
Yes.
But at the same time, I find that frustrating. This idea of, like, you have to watch this movie before it leaves Netflix. It just makes me go, like, there's movies at this point that I'm like, I don't know where to watch them anymore. Like, they barely exist. And that's, like, crazy to me because, like, no streaming platforms have them. They're just nowhere. And, like, DVDs are the way that Amazon will, like, boost something that's like, it's like, what? $100 for, like, Hellraiser 7?
Unfortunately, that's where you have to go through paralegal means.
But even then, like, just not available anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, that's scary to me. Because
Yeah,
we're living in a world where, like, we do not have a data archival system in place to keep these things existing.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, I'm sure you heard that story about how, like, people have found their Apple iTunes purchases just disappearing.
Like, that's insane to me.
Movies
like,
they purchased.
Why would you want to purchase something digitally if it's actually owned by the person still and they can just take it away?
That's not a purchase. That's a long-term lease.
Yes, and is that the future of watching movies, that everything will just be long-term leases?
Well, I hope not. And that's why you have to hold on to your physical media and drag them from apartment to apartment as you keep moving.
So when the apocalypse happens, you'll have your copy of, like, Joe D'Amato's, like, Emmanuel and the Cannibals, and you'll be like, this is what movies used to be.
Yes, I will. And my grandchildren will watch Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals, and they'll say, Grandpa, stop showing me this. And I'm going to say, no, shut up. You sit down and watch this.
So that Emmanuel and the Cannibals will be the only movie that will be, like, on your shelf in the way that, like, everyone has stories of, like, oh, my grandparents only had, like, 2 VHSs.
Yeah, after the apocalypse strikes and my building is burning and I can only grab one thing... Do I grab my family photos, or do I grab Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals? I grab that.